We'll have a 5-minute break after Dr. Kaufman's first segment to give people an opportunity to go to the bathroom. But we would like to encourage you to expedite the break so that we can have as much time as possible for our speakers and possibly some time for question and answer afterwards. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Thomas Cowan.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Close to me. I just want you to notice that those of you who accuse me of never using technology and doing appropriate visual aids, first of all, I did bring 2 visual aids. Second of all, I want everybody to read right there. Tom Cowan, MD, on a PowerPoint. First time ever. So, let me just get a sense of the room for 1 second. Because, well, let me back up a little bit. I actually only have one agenda, although the schedule of events is I'm going to talk for a while, and then Andy's going to talk for a while, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to talk for a while, and then Andy's going to talk for a while. And my agenda is only to talk about I don't know if it's a question or a statement, which is called, "Hey, wait a minute." And if I can get you to really understand, "Hey, wait a minute," I think that I've accomplished what I set out to do. Before I get into explaining the worldwide significance of "Hey, wait a minute," how many people in this room, and just to put this in perspective, whenever I'm in the audience and somebody asks me to raise my hand, I never raise my hand. No matter whether I agree or not, I just, on principle, don't. But please, don't do that. How many of you in this room think that the 9/11 story that we've been told is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and that's the total story? Please raise your hand if you think that. Right, nobody thinks that.
Science.
Okay. That's sort of what I thought. So, here's what I mean by, "Hey, wait a minute." I remember sometime September 12th, 13th, or something like that. I saw a picture maybe in the newspaper or maybe on television where the people in Shanksville, and I believe Shanksville is where one of the planes crashed, and so there was a picture, and there was a hole in the ground, and there was a bunch of people around the hole, and one of them supposedly was the mayor of Shanksville, and a bunch of other people. They were all standing around, and there was like a little video, and then they were like looking in the hole, and then they were talking, and then that was the picture of the airplane crashing near the town of Shanksville. And I remember looking at that, and I said, which is something that hopefully all of us are going to say in unison by the end of this, "Hey, wait a minute." Because every other plane crash in history, there was plane debris and dead bodies.
Yes.
And there was none of them. And they were looking around, scratching their head, I guess. And then I read the next day or so on the newspaper that the earth swallowed up the plane.
What?
And again, I said to myself, "Hey, wait a minute," because as far as I know, the earth doesn't actually have a mouth and doesn't really swallow stuff. And then, because, I'm a little bit bowel obsessed as a doctor, I thought, what would happen if the earth starts eating and swallowing up many, many planes. Like, does it get constipated, or what happens to the plane or the Earth? And so my point is that I just said, hey, wait a minute. Now, I want to make another point about this, which is, at that time, and even to this day, I don't actually know how that hole got there. Like, I don't know if Dick Cheney came the night before and with a backhoe, I don't know if there was a missile at the bottom of the hole, but I can tell you for sure that that plane did not crash and make that hole.
Right.
That's what I know for sure. That's
Right.
the hey, wait a minute part. And interestingly, one of the reasons I don't know how that hole was made, and maybe some of you have theories and maybe you don't, but nobody looks into it. There is no investigation, there is no forensic, there's nothing that we would end up knowing how that hole was made. And then, not to keep going on this same 9/11 theme, but I remember then seeing the picture of the hole in the side of one of the towers. So there's this big gaping hole, and then there's these, I think, 2 or 3 people standing at the outlet of the hole, right? Apparently saying, like, get me the hell out of here, like there's a big hole. And then we hear that there's a raging inferno in the building. And I said to myself again, hey, wait a minute, if there's a raging inferno, how come those people aren't burned up? And then we hear that there's people running in the towers while a raging inferno is going on that could melt the steel. And again, I said, wait a minute, you can tell from that there can't possibly be a raging inferno that melted the steel that brought the tower down.
Right.
Now, you could say, well, I don't necessarily know, although I'm sure a lot of you have ideas, what happened. But the hey, wait a minute is it can't possibly be that. Now, let's bring this back, or transition a little bit to science. Because we wouldn't think, so this is politics, economics, etc. We're all familiar with the hey, wait a minute moments in politics. But then I had another experience which was very seminal in my scientific thinking in life. And this happened when I was a junior in undergraduate at Duke, and I was majoring in biology. And there was a professor who had been something like 3 or 6 times Professor of the Year at Duke. He was a renowned teacher. He's probably one of the, at that point, top 10 cell biologists and geneticists maybe in the world. Apparently there was some talk about him getting a Nobel Prize for cell biology and genetics. And I was lucky enough to get into his graduate level biology class to do with genetics and cell biology. So there I am with 25 other people, and this guy who was an amazing teacher, and his specialty was the folding of proteins, right? So now we know that proteins are long strings of amino acid, but the real essence of a protein is its three-dimensionality in space. In other words, it's not just a string, it gets folded up into a shape. And this class was about what he called the miracle of how, and I think everybody can probably picture this. You've seen chromosomes, right? These little black things that have like 4 arms. And that's what you see during mitosis when the cell is divided. And so all of the DNA is compressed into these chromosomes. So when the cell is at rest, you have a long string of DNA, right? You don't see it. And then the cell has the signal to divide, to undergo mitosis, and this long string of DNA coalesces down and forms these 22 plus X and Y set of chromosomes. And then we can see them. That lecture was about how this long string of DNA forms itself into these tiny little chromosomes, right? You with me, everybody? So the way he did it was he set up some poles and strings all over the room. Poles. And then he put strings and he wound them around the poles like 10 times. So you had poles, it's like the size of this room, string going round like 10 times. And then he had a thimble about this big. And he said that if you did this to scale, the string would be up like 10 more times around the room. And the thimble would be this size. And his entire career was based on understanding the bonds and the way that this string of DNA folds itself to form these chromosomes. Graduate students, etc. So, and he's a showman. So he goes and he starts and he has this thimble and he takes the string and he starts folding it piece by piece and putting it into the thimble. And he gets about 1.5 times around. And then there's no more room in the thimble for the string. And then he goes a little bit further and gets like a little stick and he starts pushing it in. And then he gets about 2 times around. And then there's no more room in the string, in the thimble, for the string. And then he says, isn't it a miracle that a living cell can accomplish this task of putting all this string into this little thimble? And the room erupted like in joy. Like, what a miracle that the living being can do this amazing task. And me, who never really did well with groups, you know, they actually voted to kick me off my high school basketball team. I won the vote 6-5, so I stayed. So I'm listening to this, and you got to understand the stature of this guy and the eruption of joy in the room. And I said to myself, hey, wait a minute, this is friggin' impossible. You cannot put this DNA into this chromosome. I don't know what the problem is here, but I know that this is not possible. And I mean, now actually, 40 years later, I actually have an explanation for how to see that, but I can guarantee you, there is no way that amount of DNA gets into that chromosome, which means the whole situation of what DNA is and hereditary material and what mitosis is, it simply doesn't add up. And the irony is, he actually proved it with this experiment, but yet there was such a sort of delusion in the room that we somehow postulate these magical principles that somehow it could work. And that's where we are today with viruses. Now, what do I mean by that?